Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, could I congratulate, obviously, Lockwood Smith, the Speaker, on his reappointment, and also pay my respects to the Governor-General, as is the tradition in this debate. Sir, we are some 2.5 months from the last election, and oh, how the world has certainly changed in a number of ways, both globally but also domestically. And it's interesting, sir, that how personalities change and how governments start to show that the cracks start to open. 2.5 months after an election, and I congratulate the National Party on their substantial victory, you would have thought that unity would have broken out in this country, that peace would have reigned, and we would have now been inheriting the sort of brighter future that John Key promised us, not just in one election, but in 2 elections. But if you look at the analysis over the last months and weeks and days, what do we have? We have division in New Zealand. We have protest. We have court action against the government. We have Waitangi Tribunal claims being lodged. We have people being insulted, leaders in our community. We have public discontent, and we have no political leadership, sir, and no ideas from the government, as evidence from the address and reply. And you can tell, of course, when a government, sir, gets arrogant. You can tell in the second term when the government starts to get arrogant. Normally it takes a few years, the second term, but it's taken 2.5 months. And yesterday we had the Senior Minister, the Politician of the Year, Jerry Brownlee, blow a fuse, the sort of political version of the blunderbuss, blow a fuse at the Mayor of Christchurch, who I would have thought's got a fair bit on his plate, as Mr Brownlee does every day, of course, 3 times I think, on his plate, sir, blow a fuse. And he called him a clown, Bob Parker. Called him a clown. Now, I've got to say, I sat there for a minute, knowing Mr Brownlee as I do, and tried to work out what sort of inspiration Mr Brownlee, where he was at the time when he thought of this wonderful term, clown. What sort of inspiration was he thinking of? And then it became clear. I looked up Wikipedia, sir, and it became clear. Mr Brownlee's favourite restaurant, of course, being McDonald's. I sort of looked and thought, that must be his inspiration, the McDonald's clown. And of course it was, because if you look at Wikipedia, it says about Ronald McDonald, the clown, that of course the clown that represents the fast food chain, it says, quote, the clown, that is Ronald McDonald, inhabits, I quote, a fantasy world called McDonald Land, and has, get this is a cracker, and has adventures with his friend, the Mayor of McCheese. And I thought that must have been Jerry, after, the third double meat burger and chips, blows a fuse and says, right, attacks the Mayor of Christchurch. Now, you know when a government is cracking, and you know when a government is starting to get arrogant, when you have that sort of stuff going on. And so we have protest in this country now, we have division in this country now, and I'm waiting, and New Zealand is waiting for the so-called economic brighter future that Mr Key promised us. And if you look at the job figures, of course, full-time jobs down, number of hours work down, 100,000 people want or need more hours to make ends meet, 83,000 people, mostly young people, not in education, work or training, quality jobs going out the door, and families who cannot make ends meet. And this government's answer, sir, their only idea, apart from abusing mayors of Christchurch and others, their only idea, sir, and their only strategy is, one, let's just manage and spin the economic decline, just manage the decline, manage the drift south, and secondly, of course, the big idea which is not, of course, original, is to sell state assets. And again, you can tell a government is cracking when you see the arrogance come out again. Now, this government won an election. I accept that. But I say this, they know, and the polls show, that the state-owned enterprises sales, the fire sales that this government is going to engage in, have been rejected by New Zealanders, and the discontent is growing. Because the thing that Mr Brownlee doesn't get as he sort of, blows another powder keg and has another crack at people, is that people in the communities aren't silly and they can work out basic economics. And they know, of course, sir, that when you sell, sir, revenue-generating assets, when you max the credit card out, as this crowd has, borrowing hundreds of millions of bucks a week, when, sir, of course, you spend all the cash, as this crowd has, just like a household income, all the cash is gone, and you keep borrowing, your only alternative then is to say, I'm going to sell something. So you sell the car, but you keep borrowing on the credit card. So you pay off maybe a month's debt, but you keep borrowing and on it goes. And what do you do then? You sell the motorbike maybe. You sell the fridge, you keep selling and you erode your assets. Well, the communities have worked it out. Mr Brownlee once said on radio that, you know, the communities don't understand budgets, people don't understand sort of basic economics. Yes, you did on ZB. I say to Mr Brownlee, if you can balance your household budget in these recessionary times, you have a PhD in economics, something Mr Brownlee won't even get close to. And people have worked it out. So the government strategy and the big idea is for this crowd to sell revenue-generating assets, and then they try and sell it. Oh, old Twinkle Toes at the back's getting fired up. Then they try to sell it, sir, to the people of New Zealand by saying, we're going to buy schools. We're going to build schools, the odd bridge. We're going to invest this money in other assets. And people think, oh, that's not a bad idea because we're all in favour of schools and better roads and those things. But here's the difficulty economically. You sell revenue-generating assets, you forego the dividends, you buy non-revenue generating assets, and at some point in time, I know this will be a bit difficult for Mr Brownlee, all your fingers and toes, Jerry, you run out of cash.
Order.
You run out of cash. And then the proposition is, what do you do then? You've continued to borrow, you have no cash, you've sold the asset, you've used up the cash, so what is the proposition then? The only option for this government is to sell more. And they have this sort of ideological block. Now, we engaged in this in the 1980s, remember, colleagues? But we learnt. These guys engaged in it in the 90s, got re-elected and didn't learn. And I invite them to walk down their streets and ask people, are you in favour of selling state-owned enterprises? Are you in favour of selling your power companies? Because people have also worked out that these are commercial operations and that shareholders, and we know there'll be overseas interests, because Tony Ryle confirmed in the House that he has no plans, no ideas and cannot stop the pass on and on sale of shares from maybe the odd mum and dad Kiwi who might find some cash after they've paid all their household bills, if they've got a job, to whip down to the stockbroker and buy some shares. They have no plans, no options and cannot stop a pass on to overseas interests. Now, why would overseas interests or anybody buy an SOE? They don't do it out of charitable spirit. They buy it to make money. And we know what will happen to power prices. They're not going to sit there and say to the government, we're happy just to take a static dividend, or we're happy just to take less. They're going to say, we want more money, and they're going to screw it out of the people of New Zealand. And Peter Dunn will be here somewhere, I'm sure, sir. I'm sure I can see him. He may well, if the Maori Party acquiesces and actually does the right thing and walks, he may go down in history as this country's best auctioneer. Going, gone. Because he may well, sir, hold the pivotal vote that can either stop this going forward or allow it to go forward. And I invite Peter Dunn to reflect on that. He will make history, one way or the other. He will make history over this. So the big idea, after you've maxed the card out, got rid of all the cash, is to flog off the family silver. At least they're honest enough to say that if there's another election they win, they'll consider doing it again, but they'll do it after the election, they say. So we know, once they've sold these, there are others on the block. So there is a campaign being engendered and generated around the country from grassroots Kiwis who've been down this road before, who don't like it, know it doesn't work, know this crowd are bereft of ideas, and you can tell they're bereft of ideas, sir, because they start attacking good community folk. They start attacking good community folk. And when you go into press and you attack the Mayor of Christchurch, who's got probably the hardest job in New Zealand, sir, as a mayor, trying to rebuild his city, because you blew a fuse, maybe you didn't have a decent kip the night before, or the tuck shop was closed before you got there, you start attacking the Mayor of Christchurch, sir. They are the signs, sir. They are the signs of a government under stress. And it's going to be interesting, sir, as we go through this SOE's debate, to see the twisting and the turning that's going to occur over Clause 9. It's happening now. The Prime Minister knows the complications in respect of the creative remedies around that. But I invite the next speaker to get up and explain perhaps Mr Brownlee's actions, and I invite the government to think very carefully. Mr Brownlee's actions are an example of where they're heading and going.
Order. We will now have a maiden speech from Mike Sabin. I call Mike Sabin.